All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the OneClass channel. My name is Kevin, and I'm going to be teaching you some economics today. A little bit about me. I hold both a bachelor's and a master's degree in economics, and I also work as an economist. I'm going to walk you through some common problems in economics today, probably like 10 or 12 of them over the next hour or so. What I'll be doing is verifying solutions from our junior tutors and providing any background knowledge necessary for us to solve those problems. So without further ado, we can get going here. First question reads as follows. Items used in the manufacturing process that become part of the final product are called, and what our junior tutor has written is production goods, which is correct. And they followed that up by writing that production goods is a category of goods which comes under industrial goods used by the manufacturers in the production process, which ultimately becomes a part of the finished goods. Another word for this might be intermediate goods or intermediate inputs. Industrial goods are those which are used for business. They're purchased by industries and organizations to be used in the process of production and operation of the business. They include They include raw materials, machinery, manufacturing plants, and the components used in the final products. The demand for production goods is derived from the demand for consumer goods. I really don't have too much to add to that one. I would just remember that intermediate inputs is a synonym in this case, and honestly probably more widely used in the literature, from my experience at least. So I'm going to say excellent answer, that's correct. And we can move on to the next question. Question 2 reads as follows. Unemployment insurance, welfare, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security are key components of, and what our junior tutor has written is that in a broader sense, an economy will correct its malfunctioning either by implementing a monetary policy or a fiscal policy. The given indicators like Social Security, unemployment insurance, Medicaid, Medicare, etc. are the component of government welfare, and all the spending on these indicators by the government is known as government spending. Further, government spending is one of the parts of fiscal policy, whereas the other part is taxes. Therefore, the key component of the above indicators is fiscal policy. So what this comes down to is that GDP is made up of a number of indicators in the economy. C for consumption, I for investments, G for government spending, and NX for net exports, which of course is made up of your exports minus your imports. And what we're referring to here is G for government spending. All these things like unemployment insurance, welfare, Medicare, etc. A more current example might be like the CESB that was handed out when the pandemic started. All these things are key components of government spending. So I'm going to say that's correct. And we can move on to the third question. Third question reads as follows. Compared to the short-run demand for oil, the demand for oil in the long run will tend to be blank elastic. Possible answers are A, more elastic, B, less elastic, C, equally elastic. And what our junior tutor has written is that in economics, elasticity is showing the responsiveness between two variables, particularly between output and input. Price elasticity of demand is the ratio where the numerator value is showing the percentage change in quantity demanded, and the denominator portion shows the percentage change in price. The price elasticity of demand is said to be less elastic if the numerator value is less than the denominator value, and if the numerator value is greater than the denominator value, we said it to be more elastic. As we know that in the long run, quantity demanded changes more than the price because there are a lot of substitutes for that product in the long run, like the electric bike, electric car, and this reduces the demand for oil in the long run. Price increases, which are not possible in the short run. Therefore, option A is the correct option. Option A states that compared to the short run demand for oil, the demand for oil in the long run will tend to be more elastic. I'm just going to break down price elasticity a little more for us here. So elasticity of demand follows the following formula. They kind of said this in words in the write-up, but I find it better to look at it in equation form. Elasticity of demand is going to be the percentage change in quantity demanded over the percentage change in price. Similarly, elasticity of supply is going to be the percentage change in the quantity supplied divided by the percentage change in the price. And there's kind of 3 different things the elasticity can be. I'm just going to write E for elasticity in general here. It can be greater than 1. And when it's greater than 1, we say that it is elastic. So this is when the numerator is greater than the denominator. It can be equal to 1. And in this case, we say that it is either unit elastic. Let me try that again. We say that it is either unit elastic, or we say that it is perfectly elastic. Perfectly elastic. And lastly, we say that an elasticity less than 1 is inelastic. Lastly, you should note that when referring to elasticity, we always take in absolute terms. Should probably include that in these formulas here. So the absolute value of elasticity is what we care about. Furthermore, I actually looked up the long and short run demands for oil. So elasticity of oil, I should say. So the short run elasticity of oil is about 0.05. 0.05, so this is very inelastic. Very inelastic. And the long run demand for oil, the long run elasticity of oil is about 0.3. So it is still inelastic, so quite inelastic at that. But it is more elastic than it is in the short run. Give you guys a second to take a picture of that if you need. Before we carry on here. So they said A, more elastic. So we say that's correct. Good job. With that, we can move on to question 4. And question 4 reads as follows. An economic outcome is said to be efficient if the economy is A, getting all it can from the scarce resources it has available, B, using all of the resources it has available, C, all the above define efficiency to an economist, or D, conserving on resources and not using all it has. And what our junior tutor has written here is that the role of scarcity is important for economic efficiency. It is because of this reason that the resources are scarce and we need to allocate them to producers and consumers in the best possible way. As if the resources are allocated in the best possible way, then the wastage of resources can be reduced, which leads to more efficient economic output. So we can say that an economic outcome is said to be efficient if the economy is getting all it can from the scarce resources it has available. Therefore, option A is the correct option. Option A reads that an economic outcome is said to be efficient. The economy is getting all it can from the scarce resources it has available. What I like to remember about this is that what economics is at its core is so economics is the study, econ is the study of how to best allocate society's scarce resources. You see a lot of that in first year micro and macro tests. Econ is a study of how to best allocate society's scarce resources. Yeah, I think I answered this question on like 4 or 5 different tests in undergrad, professors on this one. And of course, the best allocation is always going to be the efficient allocation, just by definition. Resources. So yeah, economics definition. Economics is the study of how to best allocate society's scarce resources. So I'm going to write good answer. That's correct. And we can move on to question 5. Question 5 reads as follows. A firm makes and sells a computer for $500. Variable cost to produce a computer for the range of production of the firm is $300 per unit. Fixed costs per year to make a computer are $1 million. How many computers must be made and sold, given this information, before the firm makes a profit? So the first thing we want to do here is sort of mark everything we have. Our junior tutor started nicely. So I'm going to denote profits with the pi symbol, which is pretty standard in economics. And as we know, profits are composed of the total revenue, the total revenue minus total cost. In that, total revenue is going to equal the price of the good, P, times the quantity of goods produced, Q. Total cost is going to be made up of our fixed cost plus our variable costs. So fixed costs are essentially what you're going to have to pay no matter what, whereas your variable costs are going to change depending on the number of units you produce and sell. I don't think I wrote anything else for this part. They would let X equal the number of units, but we're already using Q, so we can ignore that. So we've got here, draw a little line. Our total revenue is going to be the price times quantity. And we are selling them for $500. So our P is going to be 500. And what we're trying to figure out is how many Qs we're going to sell Q. So we will leave that as a variable. we know that our fixed cost from the question is, I believe, $1 million. 1 million. And our variable costs from the question are $300 a unit. So variable costs are 300 times the number of units, which is again Q. So we've got total revenues 500 Q, fixed costs are $1 million, variable costs are 300 Q. And so our equation for total cost, which we see here, equation for total cost is going to equal total cost equals 1 million plus 300 Q. So now we've got the question all set up, and we can begin to solve it. So if we go back and read, it says how many computers must be made and sold given this information before the firm can make a profit. So what we need to do is calculate the break-even point here. So the break-even point is going to be when profits equals 0. And if you think about it, that's when the total revenue from selling the computers evens out with the total cost of selling these computers. So break-even point is when profits equal 0. We know that profits equal, shrink this, move it up. We know that profits equal total revenue minus the total cost. And here we've got our total revenue of 500 Q. So again, that's $500 times number of computers they sell minus our total cost, and our total cost is 1 million plus 300 Q. Of course, 300 Q is our variable cost. And we said they break even when profits are 0. So we're going to set profits here equals 0. Next, we're going to distribute that minus sign. So we've still got our 500 Q. Distributing the minus on the first term, we get minus 1 million. And distributing into the second term, of course, it turns out plus 300 Q into a minus 300 Q. From here, we want to group like terms. So what we'll do is move the million over. So we've got 1 million it's going to equal 500 Q minus 300 Q. Just a little more. We've got 1 million equals 500 Q minus 300 Q leaves 200 Q. We're then going to divide both sides by 200. And our Q star, or our break-even point, is going to be 5,000. Give me a second to check this. I just want to ensure I didn't miss anything. We can see where Junior tutors got the same answer. Work through that kind of slowly, so maybe I'll just go over the entire thing again really quickly. Our profit equation is going to be profits are equal to total revenue minus total cost. Of course, total revenue is equal to the price of whatever we're selling, in this case laptops, times the quantity sold of that thing. And our total cost is going to be made up of our fixed cost plus our variable cost. And our variable cost will increase with the number of units sold. From the question, we've got our total revenue equals a price of 500, the P, times Q, which we don't know at this point, fixed cost of $1 million, variable cost of 300 Q, and therefore total cost of the fixed cost plus the variable cost, or $1 million plus 300 Q. The question asks, how many computers must be made and sold given this information before the firm makes a profit? So the break-even point is going to be when profits are equal to 0. This is when total revenue and total costs are the same. So to solve, we set the profit equal to 0. And we take the total revenue, 500Q, subtract the total cost, $1 million plus 300Q. From here, we distribute the minus sign. We get 500Q minus $1 million minus 300Q. We're going to add $1 million to both sides. So we now get $1 million is equal to 500Q minus 300Q. 500Q minus 300Q yields 200Q. And if we divide both sides by 200, we get that our Q star, or our break-even point, is 5,000. I'll give you guys another second to take a picture of that before we move on here. Excellent analysis. That is correct. And with that, we're going to move on. We've now got question 6, and question 6 states, true cost or return of borrowing and lending is best measured by 1, the 3-month US Treasury bill rate, 2, the inflation rate, 3, the nominal interest rate, or 4, the real interest rate. And our junior tutor has written that the answer is 4, the real interest rate, and that is correct. And what they've written is that the amount of lending and borrowing that takes place in the economy is a derivative of its cost, which itself is determined by the real interest rate. According to the Fisher equation, the real interest rate is the difference between the nominal interest rate and the inflation rate. The real interest rate is the nominal rate when it is adjusted for the change in prices. The real interest rate is the cost of borrowing, as the higher the interest rate, the higher is the amount a borrower would be liable to pay in interest in addition to the principal. When the real interest rate is high, people borrow less and the level of investment is low, and the opposite is observed when the real interest rate is low. So what they mention here is Fisher equation. And just to be a little more clear on what they had written, the Fisher equation does roughly come out to the real interest rate equaling the nominal interest rate minus inflation, which I'll show you here in a second. What the actual Fisher equation says, I have this written here, is that 1 plus I is going to be equal to 1 plus R. Let me draw that better. 1 plus R multiplied by 1 plus pi subscript E. And what we have here is that I is equal to the nominal interest rate R is equal to the real interest rate i.e. is going to be expected inflation rate. Now, you're probably thinking that on the last slide, I said that pi typically denotes profits. That's true. Economists do this awesome thing where they like to use pi for everything. Expected inflation rate. And they're correct in that if you expand that all out, you get that R is approximately equal to nominal interest rate minus the expected inflation. But the reason I did all this is that you should note that these squiggly means that it's approximately equal to, and sometimes professors will deduct marks if you were to list the Fisher equation like this as opposed to like this. So it is important you know the real thing for exact purposes, but it's easier to think of certainly that the real interest rate is approximately equal to the nominal interest rate minus expected inflation. So I'm going to say great answer. That's correct. And we can move on. Up next, we've got question 7, I believe, at least. And it reads, when a government creates a budget, is it seeking a way to, 1, spend as much revenue as possible, 2, cut spending to a bare minimum, 3, return as much money to taxpayers as possible, or 4, allocate money to programs and projects? And our junior tutor has written that the answer is 4, allocate money to programs and projects, and that is absolutely correct. What they've got written here is that a fiscal budget or a government budget is a financial statement that represents the government's proposed revenues and expenditures for a financial year and the distribution of total receipts into various economic sectors. Fiscal balance refers to the difference between revenue receipts and expenditures. A fiscal budget is created to allocate money to various public programs and projects. It is the duty of the government to work for the welfare of society and ensure the provision of public goods and services, which the private market fails to provide due to the lack of incentives. For this purpose, the government collects taxes and nominal fees from its various operations, which accumulate into its revenue receipts that are used for fiscal expenditures, such as government consumption, expenditures, investments, and debt payments. I think that's a fantastic write-up, and I really don't have too much to add on top of it. Maybe if you're just to think about this a little more generally, a government budget, in the loosest sense of it, is very similar to the personal budget you might make, where they've got a set amount of revenue they're going to bring in, or in the case of you and I, paycheck that we're going to bring in, and they're looking for the best or most efficient way to allocate that revenue to all the different things that they have to pay for. So obviously, the government does government spending, things that we talked about earlier, like the CERB or CSB, employment insurance, construction for the roads, etc. Whereas we need to allocate our funds as well. So you're going to put some into your TFSA, some into your RSP, you're going to spend some, etc., etc. So I'm going to write great answer, excellent write-up. And with that, we can move on to question 8. Question 8. And question 8 reads as follows. What is one main objective in the study of economics? Possible answers are 1, recognizing the types of services available to everyone. 2, recognizing the reason why consumers supply services. 3, recognizing the relationship between producers and consumers. Or 4, recognize the difference between producers and consumers. And our junior tutor has said that the answer is 3, recognizing the relationship between producers and consumers. What they've written is that the principal objective of economics is to determine the relationship between producers, who are responsible for supply, and consumers that create demand. There's a demand and supply of goods that must take place in the system for it to be called an economic system. Humans need goods and services for survival, as they yield essential utility and pleasure. Goods and services are made from resources that are found in natural systems, but are exhaustible. This scarcity necessitates an efficient allocation of resources in an order of priority, since all that is demanded cannot be produced. The primary motive of an economic system, guided by rationality, becomes maximization of benefits. Establishing the correct relationship between demand and supply after its recognition defines economics. People who are responsible for creating supply are producers, whereas those who demand are known as consumers. And that is a very long-winded way to say supply and demand. I'm sure you've seen this graph before, but I'll draw it for you anyways, just in case. In an economy, a market, etc., we've got quantity on the x-axis and price on the y-axis. We've got supply that slopes up and demand that slopes down. Swing and a miss. And what economics is essentially concerned about, and this is a massive generalization, but what economics is essentially concerned about is this point here, the equilibrium. And what the equilibrium is the optimum relationship between supply and demand. Equilibrium. Yeah, that's the correct answer. I don't have much else to add to that, so say that that's correct. Well done. We can move on to question 9. And question 9 reads, the Ketchup Effect refers to the idea that it is easier for a country to grow fast and so catch up if it starts out relatively poor. That if investment spending is low, the increased savings will help investment to catch up. The population eventually catches up with increased output, or that saving will always catch up with investment spending. And our junior tutor has said that it's easier for a country to grow fast and so catch up if it starts out relatively poor. And this is correct. So they've written that the Ketchup Effect, also known as convergence, refers to the idea that the rate of growth of per capita income of poorer economies is faster than that of richer economies. It proposes that eventually all economies will converge in terms of per capita income. The Ketchup Effect is observed as diminishing returns in developing economies are not experienced with as great of a degree as they are experienced in developed economies. At the same time, developing economies find themselves at a cost advantage, for they can simply replicate production methods, market methods, technology, processes, and institutions of developed countries once they've been tried, tested, and validated there, without a compulsory expenditure in exclusive research, development, and testing of the aforementioned of their own. And this is correct. What it essentially refers to, this is income per capita. For those of you that don't know, per capita essentially means per person. I think capita is like an old Latin word for head or something like that. So what happens here is there are basically diminishing marginal returns. So countries can get from here to here much quicker than they can move along here. I think if you're to actually like plot this, a lot of the like G7 and more developed economies are up here. Things like US, Canada, Germany, places like that. And I think over the last 40 years or so, and I'm doing this from memory, I should add, like China and India have really shot up kind of from less developed to more developed and converged. they'd be in here. I think there's a couple that are close but have not quite reached the levels of US, etc. I think that's places like Japan. And then down here we've got poor countries like Brazil and things of that nature. And if you graph a parabolic line of best fit, it essentially comes out to show diminishing marginal returns. Don't take any of the countries I just wrote. By law, I was drawing that off of memory from a class from several years ago, but that is the general concept of the Ketchup Effect, or more formally, convergence. So I'm going to say that's an excellent write-up. Good answer. We can move on to 10, I think, maybe. That's what we'll go with. And question 10 reads that the bowed out concave shape of a production's possibilities frontier, A, due to capital accumulation, B, due to technological change, C, reflects the existence of increasing opportunity cost, D, is due to the equal usefulness of resources in all activities, or E, reflects the existence of decreasing opportunity cost. And they've said the correct answer is D, which I don't think is correct off the top of my head, is due to the equal usefulness of resources in all activities. That can't be right. I'll search up to make sure that I'm leading you guys in the right direction in a minute, but I think the answer is C, reflects the existence of increasing opportunity cost. But first I'll walk you through kind of the PPF in general. I'm trying to be higher. So what I'm drawing here is a very simplified production possibilities frontier. So on the x-axis, we'll maybe say like this is the quantity of apples. And on the y-axis, this can be like quantity of bananas. And there are essentially three types of points on a PPF. We will call them A, B, and C. So point A is going to be attainable but inefficient. So if you are consuming at point A, say you're having like, I don't know, 2 apples and 3 bananas there. You can definitely have that, but if you wanted to eat more apples or more bananas, you could move to point B without having to give up any of either. And at point B, maybe you're consuming like 4 apples and like 6 bananas. And point B is what we're going to call technically efficient. Another word for that might be Pareto efficient. And what Pareto efficient means, or technically efficient, is that you're consuming at a level that you cannot have one more of a good without giving up some of another good. Pareto efficient more generally is when you cannot make someone better off without making somebody else worse off. It's also called the Pareto optimum. So this is the technically efficient point. In brackets, I'll just write Pareto. That says Pareto. Just have to trust me. And lastly is point C. This is a point that's outside of the production's possibility frontier. And what this is preferable you would rather have point C than point B, because like at point C, you're probably having like 6 apples and 8 bananas. So it is preferable to both points A and B, but it is unattainable. And now we come to just why is PPF bowed out? It should say because of increasing opportunity cost. Yes, such an allocation implies that the law of increasing opportunity costs will hold. So that, to me, says that the answer is C. Reflects the existence of increasing opportunity cost. I will just explain that to you quickly. How do I move this? So maybe I will draw 2 new points. We will call them D. And we will call them E. So that's D there. That's E there. So at point D, we're consuming maybe like 7 bananas and say like 1 apple. And at point E, we're consuming like 2 bananas and like 6 apples. So how you measure the opportunity cost off of possibilities frontier is you draw a line tangent to the point. So tangent to that, use my rough drawing, we can see that the slope of that is relatively flat, whereas point E, the slope tangent to point E is much, much steeper. And as the slope increases, or decreases, sorry, I should say, so does the opportunity cost. So at point D, if you're to move, right now you're having 1 apple. If you wanted to instead have a 2nd apple, you would move here. And you would only have to give up about half of a banana to get this extra apple, right? So that means the opportunity cost of 1 more apple when you're at point D is about 0.5 bananas. I guess I'll write that. D. Opportunity cost of an apple is going to be equal to half a banana. Now we can move to point E, where you are consuming 6 apples and only 2 bananas. And let's say you want to move from point E here to this point here, where you're now consuming 7th banana. I know this is a tight drawing, forgive me. For 1 more apple, you're going to have to give up now like a whole banana, or maybe even like a banana and a half. So at point E, the opportunity cost of an apple is now 1 banana. The equal sign. Opportunity cost of an apple is 1 banana. So as you move along possibilities frontier, you see that the opportunity cost of 1 good is increasing as you take more of a good that you've already got a lot of. We could do the same in reverse, instead going by the opportunity cost of bananas, and we would come to the same conclusion. So the correct answer to this question is that the bowed out shape of a production's possibility frontier is the answer is C. Reflects the existence of increasing opportunity cost. So I'm going to say good try, but incorrect. The correct answer here is C. That says reflects the existence of increasing opportunity cost. So with that, we can move on from question 10. If it actually is question 10. Really can't remember at this point. I think this was supposed to be the last one. So this is maybe, I'm going to call it 11. It might be 12. Who really knows? It's Friday night. We're both tired. So the question reads, calculating the price elasticity of demand, a step-by-step guide. And it says that suppose right during the past year, the price of a laptop computer fell from $2,950 to $2,450, and that during the same time period, consumer sales increased from 430,000 to 619,000 laptops. Calculate the elasticity of demand between these two price quantity combinations by using the following steps. After each step, complete the relevant part of the table with the appropriate answers. Note for decreases in price or quantity, enter values in the change column with a minus sign, of course. So we've got a chart here. I guess I'll write the chart at the top and the steps as we go. I did already do this on my own time to prepare for it. So we've got quantity and price, a relatively straight line. And here we've got original values, denote that with a ridge. And here we've got new values. Here we can write the averages that we'll be calculating. I drew it a bit differently. How did I try? Then we've got change, which I'm going to denote with delta, and percent change, which I'm going to denote with percent delta. So step one reads as follows. Fill in the appropriate values for original quantity, original price, and new price. So going back up, price of a laptop computer fell from $2,950 to $2,450. So original price is $2,950, and the new price is going to be $2,450. Similarly, consumer sales increased from 430,000 to 619,000. So original is going to be 400. I'll write 430K. K denotes 1,000, so that says 430,000. And the new is 619,000. And that, I believe, completes step one. Cool. So step one, I'll just put a little arrow there. One that's less hideous, hopefully. Step one, and this is P for price. Step two, calculate the average quantity by adding the original quantity and the new quantity, then dividing by 2. Do the same for the average price. So just to write that out, one of the terms, we've got Q1 plus Q2 over 2. And we're going to have P1 plus P2 over 2. And in this case, P1 is going to denote, P1 will denote the original, and P2 will denote the new. I'm not going to bother writing that, but so we've got 430K plus 619K. And we can divide that by 2, because we've got two things riding together and we want to take the average of them. That comes out to, I think, what do I have? 524.5K, 524.5K, so that's 524,500. P1 plus P2, we're going to have the original price of $29.50. We're going to add the second price of $24.50. And we can divide that by 2. And that's going to come out to $2,700 as the average price. So I can write these in here as well. Average is 2,700, and the average of this quantity is 524.5. Okay, perfect. We can move on to step 3 now. Step 3 reads, calculate the change in quantity by subtracting the original quantity from the new quantity, and do the same for the change in price. So that's, of course, subtracting the original from the new. So new is going to be Q2. Subtract the original, Q1. Right, so Q2, of course, is 619K. And Q1, of course, is going to be 430K. And I think this comes out to 189K, if I remember correctly. Yep. So the difference between the two of them is 189,000. I can write that here. Similarly, for price, I'm going to go P2 minus P1, and we're going to say 24.50, the new price. We are going to subtract 29.50 to the original price, and that's going to come out to negative 500, change in price. So here I'll write negative 500. That's step 3. Step 4, I'm definitely going to shrink this. Step 4, read as follows. Calculate the percentage change in quantity demanded by dividing the change in quantity by the average quantity, and do the same to calculate the percentage change in price. So what we've got here is a change in quantity over the average quantity. And what we have here is the change in quantity, we said was 189,000. The average quantity was 524.2K, or 0.5K, pardon me. So 189,000 divided by 524.5 thousand is going to equal 0.3633. Solid effort, Kevin. 0.3603. You can multiply that by 100%. And that equals 36.33. 0.03%. Circle that. Do price now, pardon me. Change in price over the average price. And we said that the change in price was -500. And we said that the average price was 2,700. -500 over -2,700 is going to be -0.1852. We're also going to multiply that by 100%. And that's going to equal -18.52%. Circle that. And we can write these in up here at the top. So percent change for quantity was 36.03%. And percent change for price was -18.52%. Lastly, we've got, it's going to be step 5, which is long and ugly if I remember correctly. Step 5 reads, calculate the price elasticity of demand by calculate the price elasticity of demand by dividing the percentage change in quantity demanded by the percentage change in price, ignoring the negative sign. I'm going to work through this in a couple of steps. I think it's, in my opinion, easier to start with the full formula and work through it all at once than doing all these baby steps we just did. So I'll do it that way. I'm going to repeat some calculations, but it should at least walk you through how to do this when you encounter it during your classes. So the formula for this is quite big. It is Q2 minus Q1 divided by Q2 plus Q1 over 2. Then you're going to take that whole thing and you're going to divide it by P2 minus P1 over P2 plus P1 over 2. And I'm going to keep shrinking this. From there, we can kind of fill everything in. We know that Q2 minus Q1 is 189,000. And we know that Q2 plus Q1 over 2 is the average, so that's 524.5 thousand. On the bottom, P2 minus P1 is going to be negative 500. And P2 plus P1 over 2 is going to be 2,700. This is then going to equal our 2% here. So on top, we've got 36.03%. And on the bottom, negative 18.52%. And what that comes out to is our answer and the elasticity of demand. I should make a note of this. This is the midpoint elasticity of demand. Midpoint being the average. You could also calculate it from the original price or the new price. The midpoint elasticity of demand, because we're using the average. Midpoint elasticity of demand. And 36.03 minus 18.52% divided by, I should say, it's going to equal negative 1.945. As I said earlier, with elasticities, you always take the absolute value. And if we are to round a little bit, we get an answer of 1.95 as our elasticity. And looking over, the elasticity of demand for laptops is A, 0.051, B, 0.97, C, 1.95, or D, 3.89. As we calculated here, the elasticity of demand is 1.95. I think they got a 2. Yeah, they just rounded a little bit more than I did, but they generally got the same answer. So I'm going to say excellent answer. That's correct. And all right, this is the last question then, I believe. I kind of thought this one was, but so this is 12. 12 reads as follows. Economists assume that the goal of consumers is to A, do as little work as possible to survive, B, be as happy as possible given their income, C, expend all their income, or D, consume as much as possible. And Janine The Tutor has written that the correct answer is B, be as happy as possible given their income. That is not correct. Correct answer is going to be D, consume as much as possible. We make a couple of assumptions about consumers, which I don't remember all of them off the top of my head, so I'm going to have to do a little search here. But one of the assumptions is that consumers are rational. They don't make decisions based on emotion. They make the most rational, logical decisions, which of course is not at all reflected in real life, but that is what economists assume as it simplifies their models. So consumers are rational. They also assume that consumers think at the margins, so that they think about the marginal benefit and the marginal cost of their decisions. Consumers think at margins. And try to avoid the overly complex kind of grad school terms here and simplify it like I have been. So I think what kind of reflects this one is that preferences are monotonic. So what that states is that consumers prefer more to less. Another good example of this, and I'm not going to go through any more because I didn't prepare anything on it. If you want to look up consumer theory, it's actually one of the more interesting parts of economics. I'd recommend taking a look into it, and if you take economics in university or grad school, you'll be learning a lot about it. So we would say consumers prefer more to less. And I think actually a great example of this is the productions possibilities frontier I drew earlier. So the consumer can have, so much of good X, so much of good Y, and we've got 3 points, A, B, and C. And we know that C is preferable to B, and B is preferable to A, and that's because they have more of everything at C than they do at B, and at B they have more than everything at B than they do to A. So the goal of consumers in consumer theory is that they're always trying to consume as much as possible. Try, but the correct answer is D, consume as much as possible. More information on this is available by looking into consumer theory. All right, and that's going to wrap up. That's going to wrap up our session today. If you enjoyed today's question and answer, and you'd like to be notified when we do the next one, I think there should be a subscribe button at the bottom of this video. If you want to submit your own questions, you can visit the links in the description. Remember to leave a like and a comment and share this video with your friends, I guess. This has been Kevin from OneClass, and we'll see you next time.